Mātariki te timatanga, Mātariki nona mata, Mātariki kahurangi, hakari ana e te iwi. I runga a ta e kitea a Mātariki, te tohu o te tau hou Māori. Ngā wawata, ngā moe moea, e tu he iwi. Matarehu te atapo, Matarehu te mahara, aue, Mātariki e, Matareke reke te upoko, Matarukuruku te tinana, aue, Mātariki te rangi e tu I honei, tui a te papa e takoto nei, hineru he te wahine, nana te atahapara I tu, kei runga a puanga Karuhia ki a Mātariki, karuhia e Mātariki, aue, Mātariki e, ka kaitea te koroa e ki ngā uka uka whetu, tohungia, tohungia, aue, Mātariki e. Ngā kai o Mātariki, Mātariki, nana I awa ke ki runga, te arakura o tāne, I te anu o tā kurua, hupane kaupane,
Tēnā koutou, ko Billy Van Ufert talking with, and most of you will not know me. So by way of introducing Dan, I might kind of go a bit more of a personal sort of angle and tell you about how he has influenced my thinking. So in terms of my Waipapa, I'm a Tahuna, I'm from the Tahuna wānau, upriver, Matahiwi, and then the Pirikau wānau, which is more towards Taranaki. So in terms of Waipapa, I claim Aotea Waka, Taranaki Maunga, Waitotoru River and Whanganui as well as my whakapapa. But you can probably tell that I'm very Australian. You can see it all grating on your faces. So I claim those landscape features as my ancestral parts of the landscape, right? But I was born along the Brisbane River in the Brisbane Hospital, and I grew up along the Logan River, which is just south of Brisbane. And then coming into maturity, which happened quite late, you know, the Murundi River, Murundi or the River Murray in South Australia has been really influential on who I am, my identity, and how I look at the world. And that includes the peoples of those places as well. So for me as a Mozzie, trying to engage with Te Ao Māori and Indigenous worldviews while not having been, while not growing up in the tikanga or the reo. It's quite a difficult thing to burgeon in. So people like Dan, they write a lot of things about Mātauranga Māori, and they help people, Indigenous peoples like myself, engage with those parts of our cultures that we weren't gifted naturally. So I think, Dan, you've been quite influential. Before I came to Aotearoa, I already knew who you were. I kind of stalked you at the International Indigenous Research Conference in 2018. You don't even know that. I was on the Manihiri side on the marae, and I was like, that's him. And then when I got here, you know that story, we kind of connected through the Antarctica mahi that we've been doing with some of your colleagues as well. And in that, you've supported us not only financially, but in contributing to the kaupapa and the conversation so profoundly. And I think you do this sort of work with such grace, and I don't think you necessarily understand the impact that you have on individuals in that. So all those positions you hold, really, really are fantastic, and I won't run through them because there's a million of them. And really pleased to be able to welcome you. You're incredibly busy, but you've taken the time to fly down to Whanganui to spread your mātauranga around, and it's actually a privilege to meet you in person tonight and to introduce you to this group who I don't really know, to be honest. But here's Dan, here's the group.
Tātira. Te me tūtahi ke te rongo koutou? Can you hear? Ka pai, ka pai. Oh, gosh. O tēnā koe, mō tēnā e Billy. O tira kia Frank, Keith Mā. Mō tō tono ki au kua tai mai ki Whanganui ki te koriro ia koutou i roto i ngā mea o Mātauranga me Mātariki me te māramataka. Arā, ko te awa e rere nei ko Whanganui a tēnā koe, ko te papa, te whenua e takoto nei a tēnā koe. Mihi mai, korua mā. Kia koutou katoa ko tai mai i roto i tēnei ruma i te wharepupuri o Whanganui, tēnā koutou katoa. Ai, he pō tino matariri ana. Nā te mea, ko te mea nui i tēnei pō ki au, ko te mana o te awa, e riri nei. Ko tai mai te i maira mai Frank ki au, ki tōku whakaro, ko te awa i karanga mai. O nō reira, kia ora mai tātou. So I just thanked Billy and Frank and Keith for the introduction, and I acknowledge the river, and I've got my kind of introduce myself in a minute, but I acknowledge the river and the land. And you all have come this evening on this extremely frigid night. And I said, even though the email came from Frank, to me I felt the river was calling. And so, for both of the reasons, you know, to come and talk to you, and of course to come and meet the river. I know the river from its upper end, but I don't know the river from down this end. So it was for those two reasons that I was glad to accept this invitation to come this evening. So no, ko wau, ko waitomo te awa, ko owhawhi te maunga, ko tuku kapu te marae. Ko ngāti iwe kaha te hapu, ko ngāti mani poto te iwi, ko tainui me te arawa ngā waka. O ka au he uri o hoturo, me tamatakapo, me tia, ko Dan Hikuroa tōku ingoa. So I've just given a pepe out. Many of you will be familiar with these now. And you'll know that they often come when you do a little bit of whakawhanaunga, getting to introduce yourself and things. And it's a way of letting people know who you are. But it's kind of, it really is letting people know who you are. Because in a Māori framing, that is who I am. I am that river. I am that mountain. I am that marae. I am that hapu, that tribe. I am the descendant of those people. And I just want to acknowledge the Whanganui and the Whanganui peoples for gifting New Zealand and maybe the world that most beautiful and profound yet simple of sayings, ko Aotearoa, ko te awa, ko au. And I just want to acknowledge here, you know, the mana of the river and the people from which that comes. And then that's now, some would argue, a bad thing, but that's now enshrined in the legal system. Words even more beautiful than are in the Te Awa Tupua Act. And so, in a Māori framing, it says that this is how we see ourselves in the world. It's a relational way. I relate to all those things. I am from these things. And even though I've got agency here tonight, I'm the one who's here talking to you, all of those existed before me. All of those will exist after I'm gone. They're actually way more important than me. And my job while I'm here is to try and add to it, to make sure that we don't lose our understanding of what that is. And increasingly, and nowadays, with some of the challenges we face of our water, of climate change, and all those other things, it's important that we, you know, kind of remember who we are. And maybe through some of those old teachings, some of that old knowledge, newly rediscovered, we might be finding some solutions. And so I trained as a geologist. Just to give you a real quick background. Trained as a geologist, did a postdoc in climate change, and then for about 20 years I've been working with and for Māori communities. Help try to realise dreams and help try and solve challenges that they face. So sometimes bringing my skills as a geologist, but most often building teams of people to try and come in, working in alongside those communities. And so just like Billy, actually, I wasn't born on the marae. I grew up in Auckland. And so I've only come to know this, you know, since my 20s, and I'm kind of in my 40s now. And so everything I share with you tonight is not something that I grew up with. And maybe the reason I'm saying that and making a point is that just because one isn't immersed in it for their entire life, it doesn't mean one can't come to know and embrace and really enjoy and engage with it. I think that's maybe why you're here. I think Mātariki has brought you out here on this very cold evening. So Mātariki and the river are calling to you tonight. So just give you a bit of a steer on where we're going to go tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit first about mātauranga, and I'll explain what that is when we get to the next few slides. And then we'll come into, you know, the main event, Mātariki. Because when I grew up, I'd never heard of Mātariki. It's really captured the nation's consciousness. Heck, it's going to be a public holiday next year even. And so it's something that's really kind of come forth in more recent times. I think it might have been 10 or 15 years ago when I first heard of it, when they're doing celebrations and commemorations in Auckland. And so there was some Mātariki celebration. Whoa, what's this? A new year? Gosh, it's on this day, and you know, you do this, that, and the other. Awesome, and it was kind of neat because it was from New Zealand. And so everything I share with you tonight about Mātariki comes because people graciously have shared the knowledge with me. And they're actually sharing it with the nation. People like Rangi Mātamua and Pauline Harris. Rangi had the whakapapa books of his grandfather, who actually sat with Elston Best many years ago. He didn't share the stellar whakapapa, the star calendar with Elston Best. And Pauline Harris, who's an astrophysicist from Victoria University, one of Billy's colleagues. And they are rediscovering, they're reviving this information on Mātariki. So I'll give you a real kind of small snapshot tonight. And I'll also talk about something that kind of within which Mātariki makes a lot more sense, and that's the maramataka. And the maramataka is a calendar. It's a Māori calendar. And if any of you are familiar with the Māori fishing calendar, look at the paper, good fishing, bad fishing, not good fishing, that's based on the maramataka, but it's a lot more sophisticated and complex than just whether it's good or bad fishing on the day. So, let's go. Mātauranga Māori. So it spans Māori knowledge, culture, values, rituals, practices, and a Māori worldview. And although it was generated independent of other knowledge systems, including what we might know as science, nevertheless, much of it was generated using the scientific method. And I'll touch on that in just a little bit. But it has been disregarded by the scientific community because it seemed to be more myth and legend, claiming kind of fantastic and implausible creatures like taniwha to explain things. And so it tended to be seen as quaint and to be acknowledged because it was of an indigenous peoples but not really of any value. What people like myself and others have demonstrated that the knowledge actually is, much of it is empirical in nature, and in fact we can show it's highly accurate and highly precise and extremely reliable. But then it's been codified, consistent with the Māori worldview, often in story form, and for I know there's a few teachers in here, in fact if we've ever kind of read stories to people, we know that stories are one of the best forms of passing information down through generations. So much Mātauranga has been codified in story form, or in song, or in chant. But we can show, and I'll use the maramataka a little bit later on as an example for how that knowledge can be precise and accurate and highly reliable. But the knowledge isn't just in the spoken form. So this is an image of Umutahi Marae. This is in Matata, which is a small township to the west of Whakatane, and the Tarawera River flows, or maybe a K just to the east of this. It used to flow right down through Matata and out to the bay. And this is one of the branches of Ngāti Tūwhare Toa. And this is the Whanganui Umutahi, and I have the permission of the Marae Committee to use this image for these kind of talks. So I don't whakapapa from here, I suppose, that's the main point I'm making. So there's a design to this. I'm sure when all of you saw it, you said, oh, that's a whare, that's a Māori marae whare, Because that design is almost ubiquitous in its basic principles throughout Aotearoa New Zealand. So that's knowledge. What's even more interesting is that this design and the construction techniques outperform most 19th and 20th century building techniques for earthquake resilience. And that it even, this design outperformed many kind of more standard, what you might call house construction techniques following the 1886 eruption of Mount Tarawera, where sadly most of the lives lost were, they took shelter in a hotel, but those who sheltered in whare were okay. So that's knowledge. And then these things weren't constructed using nails. They were constructed using kind of interlocking and lashing techniques. And, so the type of timber that you would use was knowledge. But even, it wasn't just, a particular species of tree. For the tahuhu, the ridgepole, which takes a lot of the weight of the rafters, you would go and look for a tree growing on a certain side of a slope because it would grow up. If there was wind growing there, or if it was slightly cooler, there would be a pre-tensioned beam. Now, if there's any engineers in the room, you know that pre-tensioned and pre-stressed concrete now was one of the amazing discoveries of maybe the 20th century. Well, this has already been incorporated into the design of whare. You would pick timber that had already spring-loaded tension built into it. So that's knowledge, not just encyclopedic knowing the tree, but that you would select the right tree for the job. And then there are other construction materials in here. There's a bit of concrete, that's pretty modern, sorry team. This would have been just a kind of a wooden floor originally. And there were ropor rushes for the insulation. They've got good thermodynamic performance. Then the tukutuku panels were in that, and they were just for a bit of aesthetics. And then the colours as well. And sure, this is probably Rosine's Rusty Red and, I don't know, Dulux Wonderful White, something like that. But these colours, these colour palettes are traditional colour palettes. And from geothermal areas, you can find all of these colours. The red is kind of oxidised forms of iron. The white is a clay, different types of clays. Kaolinite is one popular one. And then the black can be found in some of those geothermal places, as well as anoxic areas like a repo, a wetland, or in a harbour, where you get that really kind of, just underneath that top surface, you get that really dark mud. There were other colours as well, but they weren't so common. There was a yellow colour you could get from some clays, and also from the pukatea tree. I understand there was a blue clay from up near Pukepoto up in Northland, but these were the most ubiquitous colours. So there's knowledge in colour, and knowing where to find the colour. In Auckland we didn't have much geothermal activity, but if you go to those sedimentary rocks around places like St Heliers and Kohimarama, and on the east coast bays and Takapuna and those places, if you pick out some of the yellower layers and then burn them, they turn that colour. I mean, you're oxidising the iron once again. I understand that there was a practice of also throwing seawater on there, which used to make it a more brilliant red. There's knowledge in that. There's knowledge in the carving. The carver had to know how to carve. That knowledge had to be passed on. And then the carvings themselves, if you understand the code, it's a codification of knowledge in the carving form. These are all people. There's Umutahi up there on the teko teko. I don't know who these others are on this side. And my apologies, that's Lizzie. She was our honours student working with us on a project. She will be horrified to know the numbers of talks which she's featured in for. This is such a magnificent image. And then maybe just one final piece of information about mātarama, what knowledge is and how knowledge can be used and how knowledge can be kind of accessed by people like myself. You know, I wasn't there when this was built, I wasn't there when the design was put together, but I can read into what the knowledge is telling us. This was sited in an area adjacent to places that experience flooding events quite frequently. But this one was sited in an area where there was never a chance that it would be flooded, because it was based on the knowledge of an understanding of the way that stream behaved, and I'll touch a bit more on that a little bit later on. So Mātarama Māori is that knowledge, and it includes the culture, includes the values, it includes the worldview. And it's not just in song and oral form. Now I've talked on this thing called worldview for a bit, and I think it's super important for us to understand. Well, that's not me, I don't think. No. Answer it though. It's Mātariki calling. We all have a worldview. The thing is that the most common worldview is the one that more or less all of us have. And so because it's the same one, it becomes invisible. Until someone says something that's like, oh, that seems a bit at odds, and it seems to challenge you. And it's possibly because their worldview is different to your worldview. And it really informs what we believe to be real or possible or impossible. If any of you have ever said or found yourself thinking, I can't believe my eyes. It's not that your eyes aren't working properly most of the time, it's that what you're seeing doesn't equate with what you believe to be possible or real or can occur. What might that look like? There was that time. And that was believed. I mean, we kind of scoff at it and I think, oh, so backward. But that, for a longest time, that was reality. And people feared sailing right off the edge of the world. To bring it into a local example, that's an example of a worldview. Hopefully there was instant recognition, and maybe a kind of a, oh gosh, he's got the image in upside down, silly thing, until you realise that all the text was aligned this way up. So absolutely, you know what that is. There's no question that we're looking at something different. We're looking at it differently. So this reflects a Māori worldview. And the reason being is that the North Island, another name for it is Te Ika Maui, the fish of Maui. And the head of the fish is in the Wellington area, Tupoko o Te Ika Maui. And so it's, I don't know whether it's a human kind of convention that when we think about things, we orient them with the head up. Maybe it's because if we stood on our heads, we'd feel a bit dizzy after a while. So it's kind of how we view things. So this is how Māori view Aotearoa, New Zealand. We're going down to the north. We're going up to Wellington, or up to the South Island. So it's not that it's anything different, it's just that how we see and make sense of the world is from a different world view. Yeah? Kapai. And so then we have this idea of knowledges, of seeing the same thing but making sense of and relating to it differently. So we're going to get interactive, team. And I'm going to ask questions that might seem straightforward or even simple, but work with me. What do we see here? A whale. Awesome. I heard some other words kind of mentioned there.
Tohora.
Tohora, there's another word. Koriro mai, what's your understanding of tohora?
Intelligent.
Intelligent, awesome. Or a word for whale, but intelligent, but it brings with it an intelligence. Awesome. Does anyone know their whales?
Yeah, we've got a great collection of beaked whales here.
This is not a beaked whale.
No, this is a baleen whale.
This is a baleen. Does anyone know? Humpback. Nice. I can be really cruel now and say, do you know the scientific name for that? Oh, this might work tonight. Who studied Latin? Oh, sorry, that's me. For those of you that studied Latin, tell me what a large-winged New Englander might sound like in Latin, if you can remember that.
Megalapteryx.
Megaptera, yep.
Megaptera, yeah.
And New Englander, New, Nova, Angliae. This is Megaptera Nova Angliae. Large-winged on account of its pectoral fin being long relative to its cousins. And New Englander because described off the coast of New England. Now that doesn't mean it only occurred off New England, of course, because we know they're everywhere. And tohora, that's another name for... Does anyone know any other Māori names for whales?
Parawa.
Parawa. Nice. That's another word. That got a bit confusing for me when I was learning Māori at primary school because bread got translated into parawa. And so then I was like, bread, whale, bread. You know, anyway, it's resolved for me now at least. Hopefully it's resolved for you too. Parawa is another one. There's a particular name for a whale for the East Coast peoples, East Coast Māori peoples of the North Island, of Te Ika Maui. Did anyone see the movie Whale Rider?
Yeah.
Does anyone remember the name of the young girl? Paikea. Paikea is a word for some of the Māori people on the East Coast North Island for humpback whale. It's also a name for one of their ancestors. And in their framing, those two are synonymous. And the key thing here is that, and maybe if we get a chance we can build on what that might mean. The key thing though is that, you know, some will see this as a whale or a large-winged New Englander or a tohora or paikea or endangered or food source. Having one way of explaining it isn't the best way to kind of approach and engage with this thing here. And so this idea of multiple knowledges, multiple ways of seeing things, and multiple ways of making sense of how we see and make sense of the world. And so that's where things like Mātariki are kind of, I think, really neat. And when we enter into this, I want us to enter into this conversation of Mātariki around a multiple knowledges understanding. we've been conditioned, particularly as a scientist, to be told there is one answer and everything else is wrong. I'm here to say, as someone who teaches science at a university and who also teaches tikanga and mātauranga, that I don't believe that to be true. And I'm getting mostly nods, and that's good enough for me so far. So one of the ways in which Māori codified knowledge was in story form. When it pertains to natural phenomena in the world around us, that's often in this group of things called pūrākau. And so the stream I referred to earlier that flows right next to Umatahi Marae is called the Waipapa stream. And there was a pūrākau about that stream that talks of a taniwha in the form of a lizard who resides in that stream. And it's said that up in the headwaters is the head of the lizard, the ngārara, and then the body kind of comes down, and the geology, well, maybe the geomorphology is similar to what we have around here, where you have kind of a low-lying area, and then it steps up to a higher kind of plains area up here. And so in this instance, in Matata, it's an uplifted block. That's where the body of the lizard is, and a kind of a sinuosity to it. And then when it comes out of that uplifted block onto the flat low-lying area, that's the base of the tail. And the warning part of this pūrākau, the taniwha, says, beware the flicking tail of the lizard. So if I took my science brain with my one knowledge and one worldview, and I looked at that and I said, where's that lizard? No, can't see it. Where's this flicking tail? What a bunch of poppycock. You just dismiss that outright. But I also trained as a fluvial geomorphologist. Flash words for someone who looks at how rivers behave. And I understood that when rivers flood, and this kind of builds up a lot of energy coming down that chute-like sinuosity, and then it comes out onto an unconfined area. And it's kind of like what happens when you turn the hose on full bore. It's out there and the hose kind of flicks back and forth. That's actually what streams do when they flood and burst their banks and they come to the next thing and carve it out, build up a levee, and then through time that stream has behaved just like that hose. It's behaved like the flicking tail of a lizard. And so when you view it that way, that's a really, really elegant and sophisticated way of codifying the observations of those changes of the stream through time in a way, because of course taniwha means danger, kind of look out, kind of be aware. You need to keep an eye out, something's, there could be something dangerous here. And so it's the observation and it's the policy, all in one. If you knew about that taniwha's flicking tail, you never would have built your house there. So that's why they didn't build the marae there. They built it just over to the side, beyond the area in which they knew that the tail flicked. Sadly, the other houses who were built there didn't know about the flicking tail of the lizard, or it was dismissed as a fantastic story. And so that's an example of knowledge that in my science brain I would say is highly accurate, but isn't very precise. Yeah? Highly accurate in that within that zone, the tail will flick at some stage. What it doesn't tell us is timing, it doesn't tell us volume of a flood event, but that doesn't matter, because as long as you take heed of the taniwha, you'll be kept safe. Right, so now we're going to get into the main event. We're going to get a little bit interactive again. What is Mātariki? So share with me what your understandings of Mātariki are, or what you think it might be.
Māori New Year.
Māori New Year, cool.
A time to reflect.
A time to reflect.
Star
Star-cluster, group of stars, yep.
When the constellation is first visible above the eastern horizon.
When the constellation is first visible above the eastern horizon.
At dawn.
At dawn. Nice.
Cold.
Cold, yeah.
Time for planning your planting.
Time for planning your planting. Aye. Yep. Pleiades, you might know it, or as the Seven Sisters is another term used. Yeah.
Into the light.
Into the light.
Toho.
Te Toho. Ai, tika tau. The new year. All of these things are correct. So what's really interesting is that for someone like me, and maybe many of you, who never grew up with Mātariki, you know, all of those, I have no issue with any of those. Those are all, in my understanding of what Mātariki is, those are all part of it too. I was surprised that no one tried to hit me with, what about puanga? But maybe I asked the wrong question.
What about puanga?
What about puanga? We'll get to that, but I think, we'll get to that. What's the purpose? And you've kind of given me, what's the purpose of Mātariki? And you've kind of given me a bit of that. So maybe I'll build on that. Yeah, it's the new year. But what is it marking? What does the rise of Mātariki again and the eastern dawn, just before sunrise, what does it mark?
The point when the days start to lengthen.
Point when the days start to lengthen. The winter solstice. So the purpose, as best I understand, of Mātariki is that it was a reliable observation point that you knew would be after the shortest day of the year when the day started to lengthen again. So that was, as best I understand, this is talking with people like Rangi, Mātamua and others, that this was the purpose of Mātariki. And that's really important because, you know, the gardens are finished, it's time to kind of ready the gardens. It's not time to be planting gardens. It's a cold time. You need to be hunkering down. You need to have harvested before Mātariki's got here and got all your crops in and kept them away. The Kiori will be getting a bit hungry now too, so you've got to keep those things away from your crops. And so that was the purpose of Mātariki, at least in a calendrical setting, and then the detail within Mātariki begins to come forth. So, as you said, and so Pleiades, any of you drive a Subaru or a Subaru? Yeah, so that's the Japanese version of it. I think they've got 5 or 6 stars. I'm not too sure what they have on their one. And one of the teachings that's been shared with me in Indigenous knowledges is, and it's really around this multiple knowledges, it's like, there's not just one right. And it all depends on your worldview and where you're seeing things and what makes sense to you. So it's awesome that we have Pleiades, Subaru, Seven Sisters, and in New Zealand, you know, for that group of stars, you know, they're called Mātariki. And so there's a little bit of information out there about the name of Mātariki, and I'll refer solely from the writings now of Rangi Mātamua. People have said, Mātariki literally means tiny eyes. And it's like, okay, that would be a direct translation. He discounts that though, and because he's found other koriro that refer to another act. And this is quite cool. So when Rangi and Papa's children decided that they had enough of being restricted to darkness and were frustrated and they were going to separate them, well, Tūmātua in that at first he said, let's just kill them. So, that's a bit extreme there. What? So let's separate them. And so they decided to separate them, and finally Tāne managed to do that. But no one noticed that Tāwhiri Mātia, the deity of weather, it's got a bit to answer for today, was sitting kind of brooding in the corner and hadn't really said anything. It was only when they'd separated them that it kind of his anger burst forth, and he said, I never agreed to this. And so he just wreaked havoc. He went first to Tāne, who was the one who had separated his parents, and he flattened forests, and he brought havoc to the forests. Then he went to Tangaroa, and he brought havoc onto the oceans. And then finally he went to Tūmātawinga, who of course is the deity of humans. And only Tūmātawinga was able to withstand the onslaught of Tāwhiri Mātia. And so after Tāwhiri Mātia was exhausted, in frustration he tore his eyes out, crushed them in his hands, and flung them up into the heavens to be near his father. So hence, ngā mata o te ariki a tāwhiri mātia. Now I don't like that. I'm not too sure if I like that version better because I'm a hopeless romantic, or whether it's because Rangi Mātāmoa said that's the version that his great-grandfather had left in his writings. Probably a little bit of both. So that's an understanding I have of Mātariki. There may be, and there probably will be, other explanations. And so the key point I'm making is that's one version I've shared. If you find another one or someone shares with you another one, say, awesome, now I've got 2 explanations for it. I know more about this thing. It's amazing. So, to the stars themselves, we have Mātariki in the middle, and I'm giving, once again, I'm going to draw from Rangi Mātāmoa's version here. Mātariki, the fire, the mother in the middle, surrounded by her 6 daughters, Tupuanuku, Tupuarangi, Waite, Waita, Waipunarangi, and Ururangi. And each star is connected with different aspects. And so Mātariki signifies reflection. I think someone shared that with us before. Hope and our connection to the environment. Tupuanuku, there's a bit of nuku in there. Tupu means to grow, and nuku is papatua nuku. So that's connected to food grown in the ground. Tupuarangi is reflective of food that's grown. So I'm trying to find my mouse. I don't know if it's going funny there. Sorry, here we go. It's connected to food that's from the sky. So berries or birds and things like that. Waipunarangi is talking about the waters from up in the heavens. Waiti and Waita talking about fresh water and salt water. So each of the stars, when you first saw them as they rose in the east, after they disappeared down beneath the horizon in May-ish, and then they reappeared up, you would have a read on them. And if they were really vibrant, they would tell you that whatever that star was connected with was going to be strong that year, or if they're a little bit faint, or if they seemed far apart, if they seemed even close. And this is the kind of things that Rangi has been, they've been taking sightings and readings of Mātariki for the last few years now. And you'll note that there's 7 there, and for the longest time, I was in the understanding that Pleiades had 7 sisters, we've got 7, and then whoopsie daisy. Rangi comes up and says, actually, according to us, there's 2 more. Pūrākau and Hiwaiterangi. And so 2 more stars. And Hiwaiterangi, in Māori thinking, is connected to the promise of a prosperous season. And Hiwa means kind of vigorous of growth, or to be really flourishing. And so when people are talking about making a wish for New Year, for the Māori New Year, you would put your wishes and your aspirations and hopes to Hiwaiterangi. And Pūrākau relates to all the people who have passed away in the previous year. And in some Māori belief, when people pass, you may have heard the saying, ko whetu tia, they have become stars. And in the thinking, throughout the year they would pass away. Their spirit, though, would go up to Te Rerenga Wairua, right up the top of Cape Reinga, and they would come down the cliff. And I recognise there's variations to this, so I'm just giving a version. And then there is a tree growing right there, and it is a pūrākau. And it's from that tree that the spirits would step off into Rarohinga, into the underworld, and back to Hawaii Nui, Hawaii or Hawaii Pamamao, to where we believe our spirits go to, our ancestral home. And so pūrākau relates to all those who passed in the previous year. And there is a custom now of an unveiling. A year after someone passes, or a certain length of time after someone passes, you would go back and you would unveil the headstone. Rangi postulates that this might relate to this act of, because when pūrākau collects up all the stars, and then there is another constellation that disappears, down the horizon at roughly the same time that Mātariki disappears. And it's said that at that point, all those who are past finally go through to the underworld. So at many Mātariki celebrations or commemorations, that's when people will call out the names of their family members who have died that last year. You commemorate them, and you know they've gone down to Rarohina now and they are with their ancestors in a good place. Okay. So, puanga. In some places in Aotearoa, New Zealand, you cannot see Mātariki in the east and the dawn when it first starts to appear. Often because of local geography. And so I understand that for most of the Whanganui area, you don't actually get to see Mātariki very well. And so another star which rose roughly the same time as Mātariki, but still reliably after the winter solstice, after the shortest day, puanga would be used. And so that's the most simple indicator that we are getting back into the new year. But what we need to align with is the maramataka. So the maramataka is the lunar calendar. And it's a genuine lunar calendar. It's not one that we have, the Gregorian one, which was kind of based on lunar months years and years ago, and now it's completely independent of anything that happens in the world, except for how long it takes us to pass around the sun. It's aligned very, very elegantly to that, but not to the lunar phases. And so for Māori, the monthly maramataka was our timekeeper. We could absolutely reliably say, bang, okay, we're in that night. Yep. And it would tell us what we could do. And so the key thing, and so this is just to kind of show you where you might have a look for it. If you find yourself at a good spot, Keith informs me reliably that there are 1 or 2 places in the Whanganui area where you can actually, on a very clear morning, get a glimpse of Mātariki in the morning. So everyone knows the pot. We called it the pot. Who called it the pot when they were kids? No, a few of you. Yep. Well, they try and call it the belt of some chap, Orion. Never heard of them. Toru is the word for Māori. Toru, 3 of them in a row, of course. So you just come across from there. This is quite easy to spot. Taumata Kuku, Aldebaran. And then Mātariki is kind of lying out across there. But if you can't see that, then you would see puanga. So that gives us kind of one indicator. Okay, we know the shortest day is past. Then we need to start to align it with the maramataka. And so this is an adaptation of the maramataka. I like it because it links genuinely with the Māori months. And so the maramataka is a stellar, lunar, ecological calendar. The basic unit is the lunar calendar. And each night of the calendar is understood and has a name. And there were certain activities that were associated with, in general, that day or night of the maramataka. These days, really good for gardening. These days, terrible for gardening. These days, really good for fishing. These days, okay. These days, terrible for fishing. Hence the Māori fishing calendar that you see. That has an accuracy to it, but it's very imprecise. So then we have the stellar part of it. So each month is linked to a star, pipiri, or group of stars. Hongomoe, Hirituri Koka, Whiringa Nuku, Mahuru, Whiringa Rangi. And so for each of those maramataka, it's linked with a star. And the reason I'm not so hot on this particular version is that it insists on aligning with winter, spring, summer, autumn. So, hands up, who's ever said, gosh, winter's late this year? Oh, spring's early? I've said it. The reason we say that is because we are according to this calendar system, on the first day of that month, it's winter. For the next 3 months, it's winter. Stop! Now it's spring. And that's not how the natural systems work. And so the reason I don't like this one so much is that Māori didn't really have 4 seasons like that. For northern Māori and those from the Hokianga, they basically have winter and summer. But they have different phases of winter and different phases of summer. And some summers, you won't get every phase. If you don't get a long hot summer, you'll only get 4 of the phases. If you do get that long hot summer, you might get all of the phases. The key thing there is that summer can never be early because it's always triangulated around whether the star has arrived, and so we have 3 indicators for seasons, or the different phases. A tohu o te rangi, tohu o te whenua, tohu o te moana. So a sign from the heavens, a sign on the land, a sign in the ocean. So you would wait for a star or something to appear, and then you would look for something on the land. Often a tree flowering or a plant flowering would be one of the indicators. And then there would be something that would happen in the oceans. Once all of those 3 things had happened, summer's here. Or winter's here. Or that phase of summer's here. And some of the detail around it is extraordinary. There is a phase of summer, and I forget the actual Māori word, but it refers to when the ground cracks and opens up, and it's like the chattering of teeth, because you know when you get the mud dries up and all cracks up, it's said to be as if the ground's teeth are kind of chattering because it's really dried up. And so what we're trying to align with Mātariki, which tells us around when the shortest day of the year is, with the Maramataka, which gives us our monthly, our daily, our weekly activities, is one system is 29.5 days, and one system is trying to mark 365 days. And so that's where different groups have different ways of actually defining when Mātariki is. So for some, it's when Mātariki arises the first time. For others, it's when Mātariki arises and it's the next full moon. For others, it's for when Puanga arises and it's the next Tangaroa phase of the moon after the tides come in, and then the tide starts to recede again. And so the key thing is that different groups have worked out their best way to try and reconcile 2 systems that don't necessarily numerically overlap. And so another group from the East Coast, Te Whanau Apanui, they have in their framework, they have the opportunity to put an extra night into a month. And so they'll get to Whittle when you're entering the new moon, like a new month. And if they take a sighting in the morning, and if the new moon hasn't appeared by a certain time after Whittle, bang, they'll put another day in there. And if you do that enough times, your 29.5 days starts to align with 365. Another way of doing it, and this is the way that Rangi's team does it, is that it's after Mātariki rises, and then it's there's a certain phase of the month. On the Tangaroa, we haven't got it on this one, it's after the full moon, about the next quarter is the Tangaroa phases. And for them, it's about Mātariki rising after the Tangaroa phase. And so for them there's kind of a 3-yearly cycle. You'll have 1 year where it will be nicely aligned, the second year where it will be kind of a little bit offset, and in the 3rd year, that's when they actually insert another month. A short month. To bring it back into alignment with the amount of time it takes to get around the sun. So the key point I'm trying to make is that when you read in the paper that's a good day for fishing, that's kind of taking about 0.5% of the information that's involved in the maramataka. Because if you had all the information, you would know which season it was. So I can imagine it will be something like, in this season, you would go at this time of the day, you would use this technique, you would target that fish, and you would absolutely catch some and bring them home. And so that's the elegance, I believe. That's the sophistication. To me, that is an accurate and a precise calendrical system. I'll give you another example of how precise it can be, particularly in this climate change, things changing. Plants are flowering all out of whack at the moment. I've got hibiscus flowers at home, and I've got kowhai. It is a Stevens Island kowhai. They do flower around July. I've got gardenia, hibiscus, and kowhai flowering all at the same time. Now that completely throws me out completely. There's another flower called kohurangi, Kirk's daisy, Brachyglottis kirkii. It's flowering 2 months earlier than what it always has flowered in the Waitakares at the moment. So what we're going to have to do then, if that's one of our tohu, we're going to have to start adjusting the maramataka. And this is where it gets exciting, because it's not just a Google type knowledge where we read something and go, ah, that's correct, and we just blindly follow it. It's tested. We test this. I used to work for a non-profit that was around preserving eels. Not like cooking and preserving, but preserving the elvers. When they're trying to come up the rivers, they get stuck into our dams and they can't get out and past them. And so we would use the mātauranga and the maramataka to determine when we anticipate the elvers would be coming upstream. And we had a little kind of system where we had some water running down and some traps, and they would swim over to our traps. And then we would scoop them out, put them in the back of the ute and take them to the top of the dam and go for it. It's quite labour intensive, but it's quite rewarding work. This was all based on the mātauranga, and without fail, the elvers would begin to arrive and dribble in December, and then a massive kind of tsunami of them in January and February, and then it would peter off into kind of March and April. About 6 years ago, because we used to catch other things as well, the inanga and the other types of native fish, they'd come in a little bit earlier, so we'd had the traps open. We saw the elvers there in October. Crikey, we thought, what's going on here? And then the rush was kind of November, December, and then they started petering off kind of into the Jan and Feb. More like climate change. This was the climate change effect. So anyway, we let them all go and says, on your way, chaps, good luck. So we came back the next year, we had the traps open early, but no, the elvers came back at the same time. The year again, no. The year after, sorry, the elvers came back at the same kind of December time. So, from a science perspective, we noted something changed that year. We can't explain why they came that year, but we noted they came. If that had been the new normal, we would have seen it the very first time it happened. In a science perspective, seeing something change for the first time is kind of the holy grail. And then that would have become the new normal. The mātauranga would have shifted and said, we now anticipate the elvers in October. And we would have had to have shifted our maramataka for that. So that's why I believe that this knowledge and information is not only highly accurate, but extremely precise. Okay, so we're 2 slides from the end now, team. Gosh, I can talk when I go on the stage. Sorry, you've been so patient with me. No one's saying, hurry up. Scorpius. Who's a Scorpio?
Oh, not a Scorpio, it's straight ahead at the moment.
Straight ahead at the moment.
Straight up there.
Nice. How is it aligned at the moment?
North, south, more.
Like, is it? So you got the tail is down, or the tail is
Lying flat in the east,
lying flat in the east?
and about 1 o'clock midnight, it's straight up and down.
I knew someone would know. Magic. So this, we've got a name for this one too. Te Mato a Maui. The hook of Maui. So through the power of Disney, I'm sure all of you know about Maui and his fish hook now.
You're welcome.
Touche. So that was the jawbone, the physical jawbone. That was the lower jawbone of his grandmother, and there's different versions of who that was. The main one being Muriranga Whenua. There is also an equivalent hook in the sky, Te Mato o Maui. So when is Te Mātou o Māui aligned kind of straight up,
That's going down.
Yeah, when it hits
with the tail coming down? I'm hoping it's around kind of October, November, December-ish.
That depends on the time of the night.
Ah,
Because everything moves around
it swings around it.
as the sun, as the earth too.
So, remember at the beginning I said that the name of the North Island is Tika Maui? And that Maui is said to have gone out in the canoe with his brothers and had to bomb on the nose and get the hook, and then up comes land. So the navigators on the double hull canoeing traditions, and that's all been, there's a renaissance of that. The voyaging traditions, the navigation, traditional navigation techniques are being revived. When they set off from Rarotonga, and I believe the best time was kind of in the October, November, December period, you would align yourselves with certain stars and then you would look for the top of the hook of Maui. Because as you sailed over the horizon, the hook rose up out of the water and pulled the land underneath it. So it literally, as you're sailing here, pulled land out of the ocean. I mean, that's the elegance of it. I'm blown away by that. And then we think about, you get into the middle of the North Island, a little bit up the road here in Taumaranui, there's fossil crabs. And scallops and other such things. Oysters. And so on. That must have been underwater at some stage. And so the pūrākau of Maui fishing up the North Island is a codified way of incorporating all that knowledge, of that navigation knowledge, of an observation and understanding of the geography and the outline of New Zealand or the North Island, and that it must have been underwater at some stage because there's seashells right in the centre of the island. So that's a way to explain all of those things consistent with the Māori worldview. So, you're not going to get away easy here, team. I've got a challenge for you.
Yeah.
It's a nice challenge, though. I think it's a neat challenge. How might you guys engage with Mātariki, Maramataka and Mātaranga in your activities? And you don't have to answer that now. That's for something for you to ponder on. And maybe that's a koha. Because if there's one thing I've learnt, is that if the knowledge has been gifted to me, it's my responsibility to gift it on. Otherwise it withers and dies. But there's also a responsibility on you now, because now you know this stuff. And so you've got to share with other people as well. And you've got to engage with it, because it's going to be a holiday next year. So what stories are you going to tell your neighbours and your kids and friends and fellow Whanganui Science Forum collective? And so on that, maybe I'll leave it on that challenge. So nō reira, koutou katoa, tēnei te mihi nui kia koutou katoa mo tō tino rongo I tōku koriro I te pōnei, nō reira, kia ora mai tātou. So I'm just thanking you for your sustained attention to my koriro in this evening. Kia ora mai tātou.
Dan, thank you so much for your kōrero, sharing your mātauranga and your time so generously, as always. We've got a couple of koha in here, actually.
Okay.
Some stuff for the Antarctica mahi that you contributed to, stuff from Ngā Rauri and Whanganui Uri, and then a koha from the Science Forum as well. So thank you so much for your time.
Tēnā koe.